Hello, everybody, and welcome to Crushing Comics. I'm your host, Peter, also sometimes known on the internet as Crisis, and I am joined here with my friend from around the world, Fangirl, also known as Faria.
Hey, how are you?
I am very well today, and I'm so happy to have you back because we are continuing our 20 X-Men questions, where I am quizzing you as a relative newcomer to X-Men, although we heard in the last video you've actually read a not insignificant amount of X-Men stories, but you've never been an X-Men reader. And then you are asking me impossible stumpers that I probably will not know the answer to about X-Men continuity, which is great, because this whole channel is predicated upon me opening boxes and not knowing what is in them. So I feel like this is the interview version of that.
I mean, the thing is that I've never read like X-Men continuity, like X-Men main title, but I have some knowledge here and there.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because you've actually read probably over 100 X-Men comic books, maybe hundreds, but you've never read like Uncanny X-Men. You've never read the Dark Phoenix saga.
But I know all about it.
Yeah, Age of Apocalypse.
But I know all about it. That's the thing. But that's what I'm saying. I know enough to be dangerous.
Now, something that I think is really interesting is that we as X-Men fans tend to like super revere certain creators who've been on X-Men a long time. Like probably one of the coolest moments in my life is that I got to meet Chris Claremont when my daughter was 2 years old. She came to this tiny comics convention in Philadelphia. It was on Halloween, and I dressed her as Kitty Pryde, and she had a little purple Lockheed dragon, and we have a picture of us with Chris Claremont, and he thought it was so amusing. And she claims she remembers it, even though she was 2, but maybe she's just seen the picture so many times. But it's like, I love that because X-Men is such a family of things and you stick with the characters for so long. It's so unlike most other teams that way, other than, I guess, Fantastic Four, that in a way you start to think of the creators that way too. But of course, I don't get to do that anymore because now I'm in New Zealand. None of them are coming here for anything. There are a couple cool comic conventions, but I feel like you get to meet all of these cool people when you go to comic conventions.
Right. So I started going to comic conventions full time as of 2017.
Full time, because it's your job now.
Yeah, it's my job now. That's full time, So if you are in East Coast, you can see me at NYCC, C2E2, Baltimore, and AwesomeCon. Which, although AwesomeCon, I kind of stopped this year. But anyway, so this year, it was really amazing to be in C2E2, where it was officially announced that Hickman is going to write the X-Men, and that's like I was actually in the room when they officially announced it, even though it was like a.
Now, is he a terrible curmudgeon in person the way that he is on Twitter? Because he comes off as the hugest asshole, lovable, but the hugest asshole, which I kind of love.
Absolutely not. Like
really?
I was so scared because I actually went to his booth first.
You met him?
Oh yeah, I have pictures with him. Like wow. I met him. So I got to be in front of him, and I had my Miss Marvel, Kamala Khan Miss Marvel jacket on. Like it's a jacket from the comic that I had it made by a costume designer.
Wow.
And he was like, "I love your jacket." I'm like, "Aww. Marry me." No, I didn't say that, but that's what I wanted to say. He looks so awesome. Like he has longer hair and everything, so he looks so awesome. And then my friend Harry is like, "This is for you, by the way." And like the way he introduced me, I'm like, stop doing that. And we get to talk about how he and I became friends because when I was reading Avengers, Hickman's his Avengers run for your channel.
Very well documented here on my channel. You can see every moment of her reading it.
Yeah, that's how Harry and I became friends. So we kind of talking about that. I'm like, we became friends because of your Avengers run. So I had my omnibus signed by him. I told him my thing about Pax Remota, how it's changed my life.
Oh wow!
And which you can find in the previous episode we talked about.
To me, he's almost like this, like a figment of our imagination. Like I feel like who even gets to meet like Warren Ellis anymore, right? Like I didn't think Hickman was like a person who would say hi to you at a comic convention.
Right? No, I mean he's completely opposite of that, and he was like very lovely. Like took a picture with us. Everyone who came before, he's like, "Oh, hey man, thank you so much for coming, for reading and everything." And then when we went to the C2E to the Marvel's next big reveal, I'm pretty sure you can find it online somewhere. The way him and Jason Aaron mercilessly teased each other was unbelievable. One of the tidbits is like, they were talking about Fantastic Four, like, going to the retreat. Everyone just said that, he came with charts. Hickman came with charts. He came with like, this is what we're going to do. And Hickman's like, yeah. And then when it was your turn, you said, I'm going to send Wolverine to hell. And that's all you said. And he's like, well, I did, didn't I? Like, so there was like, they had this like, a hatred for each, like, I don't know, like, a teasing relationship with each other. So later on when I met Jason Aaron, who knows me by now, because I have met him 5 times now.
Stalked, met, followed.
Shut up. And he was talking, and we were talking about that, he's like how it has switched now because he's writing Avengers and he's doing X-Men.
That is pretty funny.
But last time he was still writing Wolverine or X-Men by extension, and he was doing Avengers. So he's like, yeah, of course, mine is the best. Like, so there's like, they had this camaraderie between them, which I just adored. So I don't know, maybe they really hate each other. I don't know.
Maybe. Yeah. Well, if you want to hear us talk about what Hickman is doing in these current comic books on Freya's channel, Fangirls Assemble, every week we have a panel of Freya leading a panel of experts to talk through these new House of 10, Powers of 10 issues. We're not going to give any spoilers or talk about it in any way in this video. But if you want to go and see us talk about the newest issue that's out this week, then look below for a link to Freya's channel. And I'm very excited to guest there with a lot of people who I truly love. Some of my favorite people on the internet to talk about the newest issues. But we thought that we would actually flip that dynamic here and have me interview Freya a little bit about the idea of coming to X-Men kind of as a newer X-Men reader, and then she could turn it back around to me and try to stump me as she did pretty well 2 out of 3 times in the last video.
I try. Oh, my questions are more technical, right? So, I'm an engineer, so I am more interested into the technical side of what it is to be like an X-Men.
Well, let's start. I'll start kind of broad with a question for you. So, people have a lot of, and you touched on this last time, but I want to go deeper. People have a lot of opinions on what makes a great X-Men story. Like we talked about, I saw somebody on Twitter saying, I love when their backs are up against the wall, right? For some people, it's space, time travel, Summers family stuff. What is it for you? If you said to me, Peter, recommend to me the best possible X-Men story, what is it that you are hoping to get?
So this is going to blow your mind because there's a very good chance you might just stop this altogether. You may never come back to my channel because you're like, Freya, we cannot be friends anymore. To me, one of the best X-Men storyline is already been written, and it's called X-Men and Wolverine and the X-Men.
Oh no.
I love that run. I absolutely adore that run because it's about X-Men being in school. It's about Wolverine training them to be actually like, not just passive participant, but active participant. It's about team dynamics. I just love everything about that run. To me, that's like, them being in school, them actually learning things, going out there and missions and stuff like that. To me, I really, really enjoyed that.
So you like, it's not just that you love that run, but you like the idea of seeing them come together and grow in their powers. To you, that's part of what makes a good X-Men story?
Right, because that's what, I talked about it, like X-Men the movie was my first introduction to X-Men. So the movie was kind of like that. And obviously the movie had to be that because it had to introduce you the idea of X-Men or how they all connected and stuff.
Right, and you got the sense that none of them in that first movie were so expert. Like, basically Professor X was just running this little stringer team of like Cyclops, Jean, and Storm who like took care of little errands for him. But you didn't get the sense that any of them were like so amazing at that point that they were these Omega level, kind of characters.
And the thing is, like, the idea that they're kind of like taking care of each other, they're learning to be mutants, that they can fight back, and some of them actually don't fight back, and then others, like, fight back for them. Like that dynamic, and then everything that was going on in there. To me, I really enjoy that. I really like that. Other than that, I am kind of interested to see how Hoxpox is, like, we're not going to be talking about that. I know we're not going to be talking about that. But if there is a story where mutants are like, fuck this shit, we're going to take over the world, I think that would be my ultimate dream X-Men story.
Well,
I don't know whether that already exists.
Yeah, it's funny because I have a lot of examples of the first one, but they don't get to be winners a lot, which we talked a little bit in the last video, and I think that there's not a lot of stories about the X-Men like coming from a position of power and confidence, unfortunately.
Right.
But what's really interesting is like some people really love the school and the young character aspect of the X-Men, and there's been so many iterations of it. I mean, there's been New Mutants, there's been Generation X, there's been X-Men Academy, and they've all been pretty strong as a new generation of X-Men. But then there's some readers who are kind of like, well, it doesn't have Cyclops, and it doesn't have Jean in it, or, it doesn't have Rogue. And it's like, to me, I love this idea of generation and new characters. And like, how are you going to find your new favorite if you're not willing to read about new characters? So I have favorites from every generation of X-Men.
So this is pretty much more from like, me being interested into romantic aspect of of X-Men.
Romance.
Yeah, because I feel like X-Men is like, because they're all trapped in that mansion, I will be surprised if everyone didn't have sex with everyone in every combination. Like, I would be very surprised if they didn't. Some of this is actually shown, which, it's surprising that something that is supposed to be allegory for homosexuality and all of that, there's not enough homosexuals in that from the beginning.
Yeah.
Like, recently, things have changed. Some things were retconned, a lot of that, and then people were upset, which to me, I'm like, what is happening right now?
I know, I'm like, how could you? Well, yeah, we can get into that.
What is happening right now? But anyway, so the thing is, but one of the pairing or like triangle that I am always kind of like, why? Like, what is happening over here? Is Wolverine, Cyclops, and Jean Grey.
Okay.
So, my personal pick is Wolverine is a better suited, for Jean Grey than
Didn't
Cyclops.
you just say you would follow Cyclops? I can't believe you're turning on your man Slim Summers like this. And saying that Wolverine should be
the man, like, Slim didn't even know that it was cheating if he was like fucking Emma Frost in her mind. I get it. I would be okay if my husband was fucking Emma Frost. She's so hot. Like, I'm like, I get it, honey. Like, let me in on this. I get it. But the thing is, he was like, whoa, why are you upset? Listen, I may not have read enough X-Men. I read New X-Men, okay? So, to me, I feel like, Wolverine and her, like, Wolverine gets her. And then I don't know where she is, because most of the ones I read, she's either dead or not there or upset about something. But yeah, so my thing is like, they're better suited. So what's your rebuttal for that? Wow. That's my question.
Well, here, what's really interesting about that is I think as modern, and modern could be any time over the last like 25 years at this point, modern X-Men readers, we've just been conditioned to think that that's a thing. Like the triangle has always happened. It's always existed. But if you go back and read Claremont era X-Men, which I've been doing, it starts out with basically Wolverine being unrepentantly nasty to everybody on the team at the beginning. I mean, he doesn't like any of them. And Jean is like the only one who kind of will like put him in his place a little bit out of everybody. And he like starts to really, it starts out with him just thinking that she's attractive. But like over time, they get a very subtle back and forth. Claremont really didn't write a lot of it. And by the time Phoenix Saga comes around, Wolverine's grief about Jean feels distinct from the rest of the teams. Like Cyclops clearly is very distinct, and Jean and Storm had been written as really good friends, and then Wolverine seemed to just have his own version of grief, and then honestly gets put away. I mean, we're at Uncanny X-Men 137 at this point, and she's dead, and so Wolverine gets to go through all this development. He almost gets married to Mariko. There's so many great stories in there, and then he doesn't even know that Jean is back until Inferno, which is 100 issues later. So again, for classic readers, this was not as much of a plot point. And where it really comes to a head, in my recollection, is that in Extinction Agenda, Wolverine and Jean are captured in Genosha, and they really think they're going to die, and this is their last time together. And you really get this sense of like, maybe we should have tried something. Maybe you shouldn't have been with Scott all along. And so from that point forward, it starts to be more of this triangle. And I think that that's also because Scott has been made very fallible at this point. You know, he like went and married Maddie and had a son, but then they had to send his son to the future and all this stuff. And so it feels like there's like a little bit more of an angle for Wolverine. And then also early in the 1991 X-Men series, Cyclops almost has an affair with Psylocke for a minute there. And so then you're like, oh, how dare he have an affair with Psylocke? And so you almost like start rooting for Wolverine. And then I think that really came to the fore in the 90s. The 90s is when the triangle became a thing. Jean guest starred in Wolverine's comic book a lot. Like, it just was much more built up. So like, this didn't really exist as much before 1991, in my opinion, as it did after. In terms of who belongs with who, I have perhaps a controversial answer. I think Jean belongs with herself. I don't think that we've ever seen a good Jean Grey that we've gotten a sense of as a solo human being, other than in Morrison's run. Morrison wrote an outstanding Jean Grey, and then in X-Men Red by Tom Taylor last year. And my hope is that even though Jean Grey and Cyclops are both alive right now, and Wolverine, they're all alive at the same time for the first time in a really long time, I hope it just doesn't go right back to love triangle, and I hope we get like Jean as a distinct, powerful human being, because I kind of am just interested in Jean. Like, I don't want to really see her as this point in this triangle. Let Wolverine and Cyclops get together. That we've been all waiting for that for years. Let them have a turn and make it a real triangle. We all want it.
You remember that one comic book that you don't like, Wolverine and the X-Men? Guess what? There was a scene of two of them getting really drunk together, and you never know how it ended because that was left very open-ended. So I can put whatever I want in that continuity for all you care.
Yeah, I think if it's going to be a triangle, let it be a real triangle. And then for a while, Bendis was teasing in All New X-Men that X-23, who's a clone of Wolverine that happens to be a woman, and young Cyclops might get together. I think there was even a cover with them kissing. And then people were like, oh my gosh, is it really going to happen? And then he like backed off, and she wound up having a romantic link with Angel instead. But if it's going to be a triangle, let's make it a real triangle. That's my opinion.
To me, it's not about obviously Jean Grey can be her own person and everything, but
nor did I mean to imply that you were saying she couldn't be. But I guess please continue.
No. I mean, that's my whole thing. Is I think that if as a lady, you can be all powerful and everything, and you can also have a situation where you're like, you're not sure who should be your romantic partner can be, and this is the two that she. And I don't care if she picked Mystique. That would be interesting. She can pick
I guess part of my thing with Jean is like she doesn't. She's been with Scott pretty much since she was in high school, which is a great thing. I mean, I've been with my partner since we were first in college. But also, it's like in the world of X-Men, do we really have to believe that these two characters are so meant for each other and so star-crossed that it's the only fate that they've had? Because honestly, I think Scott has become a better character through the Emma relationship. He's become really fascinating, and like I am fine with. I'm not like a shipper. Like I don't have like a big attachment to certain characters being together. But I actually just think he grew so much by virtue of Emma being a really challenging character who didn't let him be right all the time. And I want him to grow too. I just want comic characters to grow, basically. I never want to return to what's been done already. So for me, it's like, well, maybe Jean and Wolverine wouldn't even be so bad because her and Cyclops has been done. We've seen it as much as we need to see.
They're so good looking. Good looking people belong to each other. Like, remember what I was telling you? Because
I do. So
all
right, so my next question for you, actually, while we're focused on specific characters, this makes a good time to ask this one. You've had a relatively limited exposure to Magneto so far, I think, but what are your feelings on him so far? Is he a villain? Is he a hero? Is he sympathetic? You mentioned that you would follow him, but what is he to you right now?
So, and this is something that, my mind was collectively blown over the weekend where we were talking about in the Facebook group, and turned out that he was not German in comics originally. Is that a thing?
Well, Chris Claremont goes in and layers in his memories of the Holocaust when he's writing it. Okay, so that was not a Silver Age creation. The Silver Age, he was just one of these kind of. I mean, I could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure that was a later insertion.
Oh, okay. So I read my first Magneto comic that I read was Magneto Testament by Greg Pak.
Oh, yeah.
As great as it is, yeah, it's very tough. So if you have read Mouse, you can read that after 2-3 years later when you are kind of processed it. So that was my first ever comic about him. And then obviously in the movies and stuff, and of course in the movies, they, as a straight lady, they didn't do a very good job of portraying, first it was Ian McKellen, who is kind of, if you're into older gentlemen, he's very pleasing to the eye. And then in the younger version, they cast Michael Fassbender. At that point, all bets are off. You're following Magneto blindly. If you're a straight lady, you have to. So they kind of set me up for that. But I always find him very interesting in the sense that he's saying that we should eradicate. How is it as a Holocaust survivor he can say that? I don't know. I don't know whether he's being genuine. That's
I feel like it comes and goes. Sometimes he's just we should just be. Xavier's whole thing is coexistence, and Magneto's whole thing is, why should we coexist? We're better. And it doesn't always come with wanting to commit genocide against humans. It's kind of just stop making us pretend like we're at the same level as you, which is, I think, one of these places where the mutant metaphor kind of breaks down, because you can't compare it to any minority group in the real world. We're talking about a different race of people with superpowers. So you can't quite judge him by the same way that we would judge a leader in the real world. And I think a lot of those Martin Luther King versus Malcolm X kind of comparisons just fail, because Magneto doesn't really have an analog.
Right, and that's what my thing, I think I was mostly thinking about, a lot of the time he comes off leave humans behind, we're better than them, leave them behind and stuff. But if the Holocaust, Holocaust was truly a part of his continuity and part of his existence. And
it remains to this day part of his, because he's been regenerated from a baby. I didn't know if you know that, but he was made into a baby and then aged back up. So much like Cap, it still makes sense that he was involved in World War II. You don't have to picture him to be 90 years old.
Okay, yeah, that is one of my questions. That was one of my questions, but we kind of.
We'll save it. I won't get any deeper. All right.
But anyway, but the thing is, to me, it's how does he reconcile that? He has seen his own race just by what race they are part of, just because of their religion, be completely decimated. And he was also sent to the concentration camp. How can he then turn around and say that we should do the same thing to humans? That I find it to be very ingenuine. Ingenuine, is that the word? Very come on now. And I don't know. That to me is the reason that I wouldn't probably follow him blindly, because how are you saying that? That shouldn't be your first thing you say.
Well, and I think the way that I think of all of Marvel's villains, and maybe even of many of their characters, he has one of the best arcs. If you go back and read just Magneto and his own appearances from the beginning, X-Men 1, and even the stuff that predated that, Testament, all the way through the 90s, early 2000s, it takes a while before he ever stops seeming consistent and just kind of seems like a ping pong ball. And you can do that. I have a guide on Crushing Crisis that is every Magneto appearance in order. And you really get a sense that for him, it's that mutants should never be secondary. He's not going to repeat the things that he saw in the Holocaust, but he also will use the ends to justify the means. And the ends are that mutants can operate independently and be themselves. And if he's got to kill some humans along the way, oh well. As opposed to some other mutant characters who seriously do want to kill all humans. Apocalypse is if you're not ready to evolve, I have no use for you. Magneto is very distinct from that. But I think it's a really valid question. And to me, that's a measure of when a writer writes him well. He has to be sympathetic at some level. Magneto doesn't work for me just as this with this crazy plan. There's got to be some level of it where you feel that he's still responding to that aspect of his character with whatever his clearly evil plan is, and that's what makes him interesting. And I just don't think he works as a scenery chewing villain. It doesn't work for me at all.
Right, and I think Magneto's. I'm going to keep coming back to this, but Michael Fassbender's portrayal of Magneto in the first movie, the First Class, was spot on. That is a Magneto you can get behind, and you can also, because he's we're not going to be. You cannot stop. Pretty much is stop fucking with us. This is what we can do. This is me controlling all your nukes. I can turn it back at you at any given moment. Please stop. Like, that was his, and I think that's a perfect response to the situation that he was put in. Then later on, the character got completely ruined, so we're not going to talk about that.
Yeah.
I
would be really interested to see you read some of his classic stories, especially like Uncanny X-Men 150, where that plot is really drawn from, where he actually does some of the things you see him do in that movie, and it's horrific, and he gets blamed for them for years, but you can appreciate his actions. I'm not going to say you can see his side. And then later in Mutant Genesis, which is the first time he's really held the world hostage for a long time, but like I said, I think really good Magneto stories force you to understand his perspective, even if you can't really be empathetic to him.
I am really looking forward to reading Cullen Bunn's. I haven't read that yet. Marvel Now, the Magneto series.
Oh yeah, Cullen Bunn's Magneto is fantastic because Cullen Bunn, and I don't say a lot of great things about Cullen Bunn's Marvel works. I don't love a lot of it, but Cullen Bunn got it. He 100% got that balance of Magneto's driven by the past, but his vision is of the future.
Okay, so now that we're talking about Magneto, I actually have a Magneto question, but that was supposed to be for another time. But we're gonna. Well,
sometimes you have to just go with the zeitgeist of the conversation.
Yeah, zeitgeist. Yeah. So I think my first thing was like, how many times Magneto switched side? But too many. That
I can try.
No, but I know it's too many times. Like I'm like, wait, like is he back? Which side are you on, sir? I think depending on his hair length, you can tell. Like if it's like a villain, it's longer hair.
He has like the longer kind of party in the back hair. Yeah.
So that's how you can tell. But one of my this is a question I actually asked some other people, and I never got an answer. But Kitty Pryde, who is also a prominent Jewish character, part of the X-Men, like mutant Jewish character, and Eric Blanchard, or however you say his name nowadays. Is there ever a time when two of them talked about their religion? Because I think Kitty's grandfather was also a Holocaust survivor, or died in Holocaust. So has there ever been a time when two of them talked about their faith, their religion?
That's a really good question. So it actually connects back to what I was talking about. I think I'm going to need to, there's a couple of issues that would be really great if you would read just to get your reaction. One of them really is Uncanny X-Men 150. It very closely mirrors the plot that we see at the end of the X-Men First Class movie. Magneto has his own island. The Russian army comes to threaten him. They have nukes on their ship. But what's going on a personal standpoint is that Kitty Pryde is the one who makes it in to kind of confront him and shut everything that he's doing down. And he's never met her before. She's just joined the X-Men 9 issues prior-ish, maybe 12. And so he just knows that she's this kid, and he just attacks her as he would attack any other X-Men. And Storm is like, what have you done? And this is the first time I think Claremont really makes him feel real and dynamic, where she's like, would you commit the same atrocities that were kind of committed against you? And that's where you really feel it. But he doesn't get to talk to Kitty because he basically just knocks her out. And then Magneto actually comes back as the headmaster of the Academy around Uncanny X-Men 200, and Kitty is still on the team at that point through Mutant Massacre at Uncanny X-Men 213, and I don't know those issues super well. They're in X-Men Ghosts, which is somewhere in this room, so maybe I'm trying to think. And then she's in Excalibur, and Magneto never turns up in Excalibur, and then she's briefly on the X-Men team when they fight him in Magneto War or Magneto Rogue Nation, whatever it's called, in the late 90s. So maybe they finally have that conversation there. But we would be into a pretty modern comic book. Actually, so Magneto and Kitty have a really significant moment in, I want to say, Uncanny X-Men 520, 21, 22, one of those three, where it resolves the end of the Whedon run, and we get this connection between Magneto wanting to assist Kitty, but they haven't really shared a whole lot of on-panel time. Although Kitty's Jewishness has been written really well by a number of authors, and she works really well and really interestingly as a Jewish character in comic books. One of the really interesting things that happened in Claremont's run right around that same time is the X-Men fight Dracula, and Wolverine tries to make a cross with his claws, and Dracula's like, "You're not a believer. That means nothing," and he just smotes Wolverine. And then he goes after Kitty, and Kitty has her Star of David on, and Dracula can't touch Kitty, and he says, well, that's because you're really a believer. And it's a really cool moment in X-Men.
But I would like to see that, though. I would like to see them talk to each other about their faith, about what because it's a very important part of I personally think not only them working as a metaphor, but the fact that there's real life thing that they are dealing with.
And I just want to be careful because I could be giving some wrong information here. Yeah, he is Jewish in the comic books, but it frequently Quicksilver and Scarlet Witch are portrayed as Romani. So I think his wife ultimately is not Jewish because they are not usually portrayed as Jewish in the comics. But this, we should probably ask Zach. I feel like our good friend Zach would be able to give us a better explainer on this.
You should go to Fangirl's Assemble channel where you
maybe we could sneak a question in. Whenever if Magneto turns up in House of X and Powers of X, we'll sneak a question in.
Yeah, and the thing is, like, you know, because we have Zach's biblical corner where he talks different various biblical theme.
So it turns out that he has an academic background in the
theology.
Biblical theology. I was gonna say biblical history. I don't know.
Biblical history, theology.
Yeah. And so whenever there's like a tiny theology hook in X-Men, Zach
comes in. So yes. But anyway, so that was my question.
Now, as for how many times Magneto has changed sides, so he's mostly on the bad side and never truly collaborates with the X-Men all the way through the original Secret Wars. And in the original Secret Wars, which I'm actually reading right now with my kid, we're on the issue, we just read Spider-Man getting his black suit, and Magneto gets teleported to this planet with all of the heroes and villains that Beyonder puts on the planet, but Beyonder puts Magneto with the heroes. And everybody in the first issue, because all the Avengers are there, Cap is there, the Fantastic Four minus the Invisible Woman was there, Spider-Man is there, and they're all like, WTF, what is Magneto doing here? Did Beyonder just put him with you because he's a mutant? And the X-Men are like, no, we don't hang out with him, he's a villain. And Magneto's like, maybe I'm a little bit more complex than y'all have been thinking this whole time. Oh, seriously, like this goes down on panel. And then Magneto, this is like Magneto's heroic turn. He winds up teaming up with the X-Men throughout all of Secret Wars because he's like, we're the only mutants here, and if somebody's going to win or help the good guys win, I would rather be aligned with you than people who are as selfish as Doom. And so after that, even though Magneto doesn't like immediately join the X-Men, there's just this sense, and it's interesting because it's not written by Chris Claremont, but clearly Chris Claremont found a way for that to be useful, because then when Xavier's body is dying and he has to be taken to space to heal him in Uncanny X-Men 200, Magneto becomes the headmaster of the New Mutants, and he is their headmaster, and he's kind of also on the X-Men team for a while, for a few years. And then they all kind of like get dispersed and killed and disappeared. He kind of gets turned bad again in Acts of Vengeance, but then he has his flirtation with Rogue in the Savage Land, but he comes back in X-Men 1 in 1991. And he's a bad guy again, and then we think that he dies in Fatal Attractions because God. And that, so he's only been good the one time really so far, and then he's bad when he comes back in Rogue Nation, but they give him in the Isle of Genosha to just be his sovereign island to rule as a mutant ruler. So I think we can kind of say he's good again at that point. So that's good time number 2. But then of course Morrison destroys Genosha at the beginning of his new X-Men run, and he has Magneto come back as a bad guy. But then just after the new X-Men run is over, Magneto comes back as a good guy again, living in the ruins of Genosha with Charles Xavier in Chris Claremont's Excalibur, I want to say volume 3, which leads into House of M. And then after House of M, he's kind of like, is he a good guy, is he a bad guy, or has he lost his powers for a few years? He comes back briefly as a bad guy in Uncanny X-Men 500 doing something with the High Evolutionary, but then he screws over the High Evolutionary and he comes back to work with the X-Men right before Second Coming, and he's like full-on X-Men from when he brings Kitty back up and through the end of the Phoenix 5, and then he's still a good guy through all of Marvel now, and he's still kind of a good guy now. Like, he hasn't really gone full heel turn again, so he hasn't really switched back and forth that much, really just 3 times. The original switch starting in Secret Wars, the second switch when he takes over the island of Genosha, and then this third seemingly permanent switch that started just before Second Coming.
Wow. So it wasn't that bad then. I was expecting to hear like, oh, he does that in every 5 issues. No.
That's why his arc is so interesting. He's not, they've really prevented him from being somebody that just waffles. Like a lot of these villains that get handed around from the different franchises, you feel like they're good, they're bad, like it fits the story. Magneto has a very specific arc. It might start to look like a sine wave over time, but it's not jagged. It's actually got very, very clear peaks and valleys, and that's why he's so interesting.
All right. So with that, shall we end today's episode?
I think so. They were a quartet of intense questions. But look, if you want to hear us go this intense and this opinionated, but you want to hear it about a specific X-Men issue, this is kind of like a little sampler platter for what we are doing when we talk about House of, we keep saying House of X, Powers of 10, because Jonathan Hickman came out and said, when even though the title is Power of X, X is the Roman numeral X, it means 10. And if you want to know why it's called Powers of 10, it is pretty obvious in the comic book, but you have to go to the Fangirls Assemble channel to hear us explain it to you.
And the new episode should be up as soon as you're done with here. If you go to our channel, the new episode will be there for you, waiting for you, and the channel description is right there. It's very easy, though. If you search Fangirls with a Z, Assemble, or you can type YouTube/C/Fangirls Assemble. You should be able to find us. But anyway,
awesome. And we will continue. We are not done this X-Men 20 questions because we're nowhere near 20. So come back next week for more X-Men, X-Pert, and New Mutant 20 questions with myself and Freya. This has been Crushing Comics. Thank you so much for watching. We'll see you again soon.
See ya.